and welcome to Tea and Strumpets. I'm Kelsey, and I'm here today to share with you our second episode in the Escondido Public Library Chats, all about romance. Today is all about historical romance. So Zoe will be chatting with authors Eva Leigh and Erica Ridley. This episode was recorded on May 2nd, 2020, and it was done via Facebook live stream, so the audio quality and editing are not quite the same as the usual content. However, it's still great content. We're talking all about our favorite genre, historical romance, with two wonderful authors. So just as a reminder, this was also recorded via video, so you can head on over to the Escondido Library YouTube channel to check it out, and that is also linked in the show notes if you want to be taken directly there. We want to thank the Escondido Public Library and librarian Jessica Buck for inviting us to participate in these wonderful chats with so many wonderful romance authors. Next week, you'll get a little mini-sode from us, which is discussing the second epilogue of The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. So we hope you enjoy this chat all about historical romance with Eva Leigh and Erica Ridley.
So hello again, and welcome everyone to the Escondido Public Library Romance Chats. In this series, we are talking to different authors that span the subgenres of romance. I'm Jessica Buck, Adult Services Librarian, and I'm joined here with Zoe from Tea and Strumpets podcast. Zoe is part of our Library Romance Book Club, and her podcast is devoted to historical romance novels. So during the chat, I will be monitoring the Facebook feed, so I'll see if you have any comments or any questions, and we'll try to get those answered.
And hi, everyone. I'm Zoe. And before we get to the wonderful authors joining us today, sorry, guys, just one sec. I wanted to talk just a little bit more about romance and the specific subgenre of romance that we're exploring today. So last time we had some comments that folks were hoping to understand a little bit more about the genre in general. So I figured let's start from the beginning. What is bromance? In romance, we generally agree to define it as that a romance novel or romantic novel is a type of novel and genre fiction which places its primary focus on the relationship and romantic love between two or more people and usually has an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending, which is the happily ever after or sometimes the happily for now. So romance has many subgenres. So last week, we talked to two contemporary authors, and today we're talking to two historical romance authors. And then throughout the rest of our series of chats, we'll be talking to other subgenres too. So come back each week to hear more. And so as historical romance's novel name suggests, historical romances deal with the past. And as varied as the past is, you'll find a historical romance novel about that. We've got Vikings and pirates and medieval and Egypt and Greece and Rome. We've got Civil War, colonial, Gilded Age, Western romances set in the US. And of course, we have the ever popular Regency, Georgian, and Victorian romances set in England and Scotland mostly. And of course, there's many more in between. And our authors today write in my favorite subgenre, and it's in fact the one I have an entire podcast devoted to. So today we're talking about the Regency in historical romance. So get ready to join us for a trip across the pond and into the past.
Okay, as we mentioned earlier, we are joined by two amazing historical romance novel authors, Eva Leigh and Erica Ridley. So first we have Eva Leigh, who writes novels chock full of determined women, sexy men, and awesome 80s references. Her newest novel, Would I Lie to the Duke, second in her Union of Rake series, comes out July 28th. We're excited. And we are also joined by Erica Ridley with a fabulous backdrop, a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of over 30 historical romance novels. Her most recent release is The Duke's Desire, number 8, in her 12 Dukes of Christmas series. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
And Erica, please, I meant to ask you this before we started. I meant to double check because I counted the novels and I believe your latest was also The Duke's Desire. So please correct us if something's wrong there.
Oh, no, that's true.
Okay.
Yay!
Yay. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. And we're going to get started with a lot of questions about historical romance, but I think, I was trying to think of how, what's the best way to kind of get into a conversation here. And I feel like there just really isn't another way right now. So how's everyone doing in this very weird time? Maybe Erica, you want to start us off?
Well, I live in Costa Rica, so I live on a mountain in the rainforest and very specifically on a macadamia farm. So we are putting the distance in social distancing, which is good and bad. So there's no one really. So that's the good part. There's no one to come by and share the virus with us. But also we are able to, we have a good view and we can go out walking on the farm. And so it's not as terrible as it could be. So we're very grateful.
Wow. Very cool, though, to be where you are. It sounds like a beautiful place to be. And how about you, Eva?
I'm good. I am kind of grateful right now that I'm writing historical romance because I know that I've heard from other contemporary romance authors that, it's challenging right now to think about writing and setting and stuff like that. So I'm pretty grateful that I get to sort of live in this specific Regency world right now. Where I live kind of on the coast of Central California. And like Erica, I'm kind of in a really pretty place that has some space around it. So I know I'm super, super grateful to be where I am right now. Cause I'm from Los Angeles. And so I know how challenging it can be to live in really urban environments in the midst of this.
Yeah, I'm in the suburbs in San Diego, and I feel lucky just to even be in the suburbs, that I can walk around my neighborhood and walk my dog. And, it may be the same route that I take every day, but it's still, it's a nice route, and it is nice to be able to get out and kind of just get some sunshine on you, So I'm glad you guys are doing okay. And so let's get into our questions, shall we? So I guess the first thing that we want to know is just a little bit more about you guys. So if we gave a short introduction about you, but we'd like to know a little bit about you and the books that you write. So Eva, would you like to start us off there?
Sure. I'm currently writing Regency set historicals, and I have been writing them now for Avon probably for about, 6 years or something like that. The current series that I'm working on, the Union of the Rake series, is my, it's kind of a mashup between my 80s background, like I grew up in the 80s, and kind of setting it, taking a lot of films and things like that and music and things and setting them from the 80s and then sort of putting them in the Regency period. And I like to say that they're not so much an homage because a lot of these movies that we were really into, like the overarching premise of the series is The Breakfast Club, which I recently watched a few months ago, and it's super problematic. I mean, so I'm going to own that. So what I'm trying to do is sort of take elements of that, the things that I remembered from these films, and sort of imbuing them in these historical settings and hopefully addressing or redressing some of the more complicated elements from these. And so while I'm writing these books, you're probably going to see my kittens running around back there. I just before this whole thing happened, I adopted a couple of a bonded pair of brothers, and they love to run around. And so they may go across the screen. Anyway, so right now, that's what I'm kind of doing right now is doing these Regencies that are very heavily influenced by aspects of the 1980s, which basically is me in a nutshell.
Well, I would say that it's as someone who has read your books, and also I just finished my arc of Would I Lie to the Duke. So I'm not an 80s child, but I seem to very much identify with the 80s, and it's just been very fun to read. So I really am enjoying all the 80s references. So
thanks. I hope that this is something, it's not exclusively for people who are Gen X like me. I hope it's something that everyone can enjoy, and it's not just supposed to be for this really narrow mindset. It's because a lot of these books and these films are so trope heavy, and they're so like fake dating and makeovers and things like that. So I think those are things people really have their catnip, and I hope that there's a little catnip for everybody in these books.
Yeah, definitely. And Erica, how about you? A little bit about you and the books you write.
So I write Regency set historicals as well. They are mostly fun, laugh out loud romps. I'd say like emotional feel good romance is what I go for. And I have a new series coming out called The Wild Winchesters with Forever at Grand Central Publishing. And it's kind of like an Ocean's 11 family of siblings who go and they commit capers. So like the idea for the first one, it's called The Duke Heist. So it's coming out in about 6-7 months. And kind of like, why seduce a duke the normal way when you can accidentally kidnap one in an elaborately planned heist, right? So she's trying to get a painting. She gets the painting. She also gets the duke. So it's been just a lot of fun to just have fun with crazy situations, and just if it makes me laugh, then I hope it can make other people laugh too.
That you already made me giggle. And I mean, definitely I've already said like historicals and Regency are my catnip in general. So the whole genre. So that sounds like really exciting and fun.
I'm so excited.
I know, right? Our eyes grow wide. So we want to know, like, for those of us watching too, I think it's really interesting knowing from writers when you got into romance, when you first started reading it, and then how did you make the journey from a reader to a writer? And so maybe we'll flip it over to Erica first this time.
Okay, so I think I'm going to answer in backwards order. I kind of always wanted to be a writer. It wasn't romance at first. When I was very small, I thought I would be the next Stephen King, which I think was concerning for my parents. So they're very glad that I didn't get that wish. And I wrote these really terrible stories that I wish I still had now, because I'm certain that they were not scary always. I didn't read my first adult romance novel until I was about 20 years old. The first one I picked up was Joanna Lindsay's classic, Once a Princess. I don't know if you've read that one. And I was hooked. I thought at the time that I still wanted to write suspense, but now I had historical romance in the brain, and it slowly took over. Mostly I credit Avon's Fanlit contest in, I'm bad at years, in 2006 with putting me in my current path. I only participated in the first chapter, but I met so many people who are still friends today that have gone on to have these amazing careers in historical romance. And it's just been a really awesome network of people. So I'm going to say peer pressure. Peer pressure is how I got into this.
That's fabulous. That's a good way to get into writing fantastic books. So I'm impressed. And what about for you, Eva?
Well, kind of like Erica, I started writing pretty much for me anyway, almost immediately after I learned how to read and literally write. Like, I started writing stories. So I had wanted to be a writer, I don't know, since I was very, very small. But I started reading romance sometime in high school, probably sophomore year, I think, because a friend of mine, her mom would read romance novels and then give her books, and then my friend would share them with me. And so we started reading. I was a voracious reader of like all of those, like Jude Deveraux and Judith McNaught and Joanna Lindsay and Iris Johansen, like all of these like sort of foundational second wave romance authors of the 80s and into the 90s. But almost immediately after I started reading romance, around that time, I was like, well, I want to write these stories too. So it was a new way to sort of focus my writing energy. And so I started writing romance probably in high school. And eventually I kind of went through different permutations as to what I wanted to do with my life. And I went to graduate school and stuff like that. But while I was there, I entered a writing contest and I won this contest. And then I decided, you know what, I'm not going to get a PhD. I'm going to go get this MFA. And so I went and I got an MFA in fiction. And while I was there, and it was a very elite MFA program, and I only say that not as a humble brag, but because I was secretly writing romance while I was at this like very elite writing program. And I never brought my work to workshop because God forbid, that would cross anybody's desk. But pretty much after I finished that program, I went back to Los Angeles, and then I started working like a day job and writing romance and submitting to agents and stuff like that. So I started actually as Zoe Archer in 2006. And then in like 2014, I started writing these Eva Leigh romances. So it's like, it's been this progression, but it's sort of always been, it's like, I think, Erica, I don't know if you agree with me, but it's like, it's hard not to read romances and not want to write them. Like you want to start, it engenders stories. And so you have stories that you want to tell too. And so I found myself in that position. And specifically for me, because there was some gender politics in the 80s that I found problematic, I wanted to sort of deal with that in my way. And so one of my first romance novels that I wrote when I was in high school, the heroine was a pirate ship captain, and she sells the hero into indentured servitude. So I think that kind of like set the tone for what my books were going to be like.
Oh, that's great. And I mean, as a voracious romance reader myself, I can certainly identify with that. There's always stories in your head, and you always think, well, like, oh, maybe I'll write it down one day, and hey, that one day might happen. You never know. So yeah, very cool. And so I wanted to get a little bit deeper into this genre now. And especially because both of you guys, write in the Regency. Why do you think that historical romance, but Regency / maybe Victorian in particular, is so popular with today's reader, even? So, does anyone want to, Eva, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, a lot of people have spent a lot of time sort of tracing the origins of the modern historical novel, which seems like a contradiction in terms, but it's like what we're doing is interpreting historical periods through a contemporary lens. Obviously, we're not trying to like capture like the actual time period, but this is our specific thing. And like a lot of people sort of trace it back first to Jane Austen, who was writing during this time period, the Regency. And then Georgette Heyer, who was writing in the early part and first half of the 20th century, who really created like the Regency romance novel as we know it. And I think it's just been a really enduring, popular between Austen's immaculate work and then Heyer's popularizing of that period. I think that sort of helps generate this subgenre of historical romance that people just adore. And, like Judith McNaught was one of the first romance authors that I was reading. And so she really, and then Mary Jo Putney in the 90s, and those kind of imprinted on me. And that's sort of like what got me into it. And I think people really like the sort of fantasy elements of it in terms of like the carriages and the balls and the titles and the sort of codified rules of conduct, and then breaking those rules, which we enjoy. I don't know, Eric, what do you think about that?
Well, I was definitely going to say the rules for sure. How many times have you been in a social situation where you didn't know what to do or what to say or what to wear? And so it's all spelled out for you. And so that's nice. But then also, exactly like you said, we want to read about the people who break the rules, who want something so much that they do it anyway, even though they know there goes their reputation and things like that. And I think also you were mentioning some of the fantasy elements, and I think, like the clothes and things like that, the idea that you're just looking fabulous always and that everything just looks so romantic, the candlelight and the embroidered outfits and the cravats, of course, and everything else.
Do the cravats, right?
Right. Exactly.
I as a reader, I came to romance from being like purely a fantasy reader. And I think like I always was looking for that happily ever after, which you do get in fantasy a lot. And there often is romance within fantasy. But I feel like, historical romance just made so much sense to me, where I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for all along, right? It gives me that little bit of an element of fantasy, but at the same time, like you said, there are rules that society has, and there are also rules that Regency readers seem to think that there are about Regency, which I'm going to get to again later, because I do want to talk more about that. But I think maybe talking a couple more things about the genre maybe will give some of our listeners some more context before we get there. So we've already talked a little bit about tropes, and tropes are huge in romance. We've talked, Eva, how some of your books are kind of taking on some of these 80s tropes even, and into the past more, or even though they're not specific to the 80s, I shouldn't say 80s tropes, but I guess, do you guys think that historical romance relies more heavily on tropes than contemporary romance does, or other genres of romance, or do you disagree? And I ask this as a mostly historical romance reader who has now brought her tally of outside of historical romance reads to 4. So as of this morning, I finished my 4th one. So I feel like from my very limited experience, it seems like historical romance is full of tropes in a good way. I'm not saying it's in a bad way. And I'm curious what you guys think about that. So Erica, you want to take that on first?
I would say, having never studied it, so huge disclaimer, this is me guessing. I would guess that any popular genre is chock full of tropes. They're just different. And if you don't read the genre, you probably wouldn't recognize them. So I would guess, just from having read even like horror, paranormal, or anything like that, there are so many different tropes in all these other genres that I would think, I think it was Eva said earlier, the catnip that we all want. And so it's just different catnip for different people, probably. Personally, I love tropes. I have a list that I keep. Do you know who Dr. Jennifer Lynn Barnes is? She does these fabulous workshops. She's a worldwide expert on the science of fiction and storytelling. And so she suggests keeping an id list. So like id, like Freud, right? Like the things that make you really, really excited. Like when you just hear that one phrase and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to one-click that book. And then you just keep that list. And so it's more than just tropes. It's just the things that just really grab you. And so I keep a list of things, and then that makes me excited about the things that I'm going to write. And I think we also do it subconsciously, right? So in historical or whatever the thing is, there's a thing that makes you one click that maybe is different for somebody else. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I was recently talking about that with my co-host on my podcast, and just the things that we are different on and the things that we are the same on. Everybody has their thing that they want to buy. And Eva, I know you write multiple genres. So what are your thoughts on my comment?
I like Erica said, I think we as humans who like stories gravitate towards tropes. I think tropes are at the heart of pretty much most narratives. And either you subvert the trope or you lean into it. It's kind of dependent on the author. So for example, like in My Fake Rake, which I have it right here, that one has a makeover, but in this instance, it's the hero getting the makeover instead of the heroine. So it's like a slight tweak or something like that. But I was actually I just finished this book by Mia Sosa. Sorry, it's backwards, but it's The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. And this is a contemporary romance, and it's a great own voices book. And in this, it's like enemies to lovers. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones I don't think it's sort of like kind of like fake dating, but not exactly. But it's very trope heavy. But it's also like, how do you artfully massage it so that it's something that you're like, oh, hey, this is the part where they have to work together, but they hate each other. but it's like in the hands of the skilled author, you can kind of you enrich it, you embroider it, you kind of make it deeper and rounder, and so you can be just like, oh, it's my favorite. Oh, it's just one bed. There's a just one bed, and some people love just one bed, and so it's like, how are you going to do just one bed, but in a way that is both surprising and also inevitable?
Very cool. Yeah. And do you guys have a favorite trope to read and write? And are they the same or different? Eva?
I've been thinking a lot about that because I've been trying to lean more into tropes, because that is, people, readers really enjoy that. And it's funny for me, like, I don't know if it's a trope, but it's a type, but I love the cinnamon roll hero, which is taken from an Onion article, the satirical paper, The Onion, where I'm going to mess up the headline, but it was like cinnamon roll, too good, too pure for this world, or something like that. So the cinnamon roll hero specifically is like this guy who's just like sweet and gooey and nice and supportive. Some people call them beta heroes. I really love writing and reading about that. And then recently I was posting that one of my favorites is the cinnamon roll who's secretly kinky. Like, I'm just like, I bring that, more of it, please. So I enjoy that personally.
And
you know a little bit more about me.
Erica?
I think when I'm writing, I write a lot of secret identities, although I don't necessarily look for that when I am looking for a book to read. But for both reading and writing, one that I love are strong heroes who have absolutely no idea how to handle the heroine. I love those situations where, for whatever reason, he thinks that he knows exactly how his world is going to work. He knows he's the master of it, whatever it may be. And then she comes along and turns everything upside down. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, as we kind of said at the beginning, right? There's a ton of subgenres. There's a ton of tropes. Like, romance has something for everybody, whatever your catnip is. And, but I find it so interesting as a reader, who just lapped up hundreds of books for many years. And then I decided to go on this endeavor of, podcasting and joining romance book clubs and reading more, and, had never asked these questions to myself as a reader. Like, I know a lot of readers know what their favorite trope is, and they buy books just because of that trope. And I find it so interesting that I feel like I'm still on that journey to find my favorite trope, because I just kind of love them all. I just think, when you have a good book and it's well written, like, there's so much to love about it, even if it's not your trope, let's say. But so I encourage everybody, just because it doesn't seem like your cup of tea at first, or it's not your favorite thing, still might be fabulous. So, I just read a contemporary that, like, the description I was so turned away from, and then I read the book and it was just fabulous and changed my mind completely. So yeah, you never know what you're getting into. But speaking of historical romance readers, what do you guys think that today's historical romance reader wants to read? What are they looking for when they're buying a new book? Eva?
Well, I think something that we're starting to see more of is because the historical, let me back this up. Because the historical romance novel is produced by the current culture, like this culture that we exist in now is the culture that is producing the historical romance. So our specific ideology or needs or wants or desires are sort of projected onto this historical time period. At the same time, we're also understanding that the history that we have been receiving from various outlets, like at certain educational things, entertainment and things like that, is highly subjective and extremely, in a way, it's distorted by the ideology which produces it. So, for example, if you believe the BBC, historical England was predominantly white. Well, we know that that's not true. So I feel like in this culture that we're existing in now, in this moment that we're existing in now, that we are starting to finally acknowledge that there are so many narratives that we have not been given access to. And also there's been this sort of fallacious idea that, well, like, because life was so hard for people who are LGBTQIA, or if they were a person of color, their life was so hard and all it was miserable. And it's like, well, we know that that's not true. So it's like we get to see finally narratives of happily ever afters, of like acknowledging finally that this was there, this was real. And so including the evolution of feminism, it didn't start at the end of the 20th century. It didn't even start with Mary Wollstonecraft. And there were always people who supported the ideology of feminism. Now, mind you, this was a feminism that was problematic because it was specifically geared towards white heterosexual women. But that's another story for another day. In any event, you know that gif from New Girl where it's like, I hope you like feminist ramps, because that's kind of my thing. Anyway, I could go on this for a while, but what I feel, what we're finally seeing is an acknowledgement of a much broader, much richer, much more diverse, much more inclusive historical setting. And we can also acknowledge that there are things that are problematic about this time period, and we can incorporate that into our work, which is, I know, something that I and many other historical romance authors have been trying to do for the past, throughout this whole, the history of the historical romance novel.
And Erica, it's the same question about what today's reader wants to read.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Eva just said. This is a very exciting time because all sorts of different stories that didn't exist in a mainstream way before are now starting to be more easily found. Like you mentioned LGBTQ, I could think of maybe 2 lesbian Regency romances that I knew about when I was when I was first starting to read, and now there's a lot more. Or like the diversity in terms of backgrounds, like you said, like now I can have a Black heroine, whereas before nobody would have cared to read that story from me. And so that's very exciting. So that's definitely exciting for me, like as a writer. As readers, I think I love that maybe we can bring new blood into historical romance, because for so long everybody's been saying, oh, historical romance readers, they're only very old. They'll, it's your grandmother. And while I hope that until my dying day I'm a historical romance reader, I also hope that we can get representation from all the different generations in there. And so I think that this is maybe the single best time we've had for Histrom. We finally get to tell stories that represent more people, and maybe it'll explode in a way that we can't even predict today when we look back on it 10 years from now.
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm encouraged and excited as a reader to kind of see a lot of those sort of trends. I feel like it's not like boom, everything's flipped, but it's definitely like it's there, it's creeping in. And that's an exciting thing, because I really want to see more of that too. And I want to talk more about that too, but I think we have some questions from Facebook.
Yes, we do. So on the topic of the readers, we have 2 Facebook questions. The first one is it harder to write sexy scenes in this time of social distancing?
Great question.
Yeah. How about we start with Erica, since you're very far from anyone?
Well, I will say that sex scenes are always a little bit challenging for me anyway. I have to kind of have to get into the mood, so to speak. And so I guess it's not harder because I'm terrible at procrastinating that in the first place. But just it's harder to write in general, just being really honest, just with all the stress of everything that's going on, just the thought of sitting down and you stare at this blank page and you're like, okay, now make thousands of people happy and no pressure. And so,
No, absolutely. What about you, Eva? Has it been hard? Has it been easier?
Has it been hard? I Okay, all right.
No, I didn't even mean that.
No, I know. I'm a 46-year-old adult. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Honestly, like Erica was saying, I think the biggest challenge right now is just writing in the midst of this. It's very challenging. Even historical romance, which has this layer of remove and stuff like that. So if you have like a ball scene and you're like, oh my God, there's so many germs in the room. So that's a little challenging in that regard. I'm trying, honestly, for me, the past 4 years have been hard to write because it's been a very challenging climate to insert optimism in a world where I feel like it's faltering a lot. And so this is just like an additional element that's just like, hey, you thought it was challenging before. Hey, pandemic. So that makes it a little bit difficult. But I do know in terms specifically of sex scenes, my books have been getting progressively hotter. And I think that for me has been in a way for me to sort of have the heroines taking ownership of their bodies, because I write male-female heterosexual relationships. So I work in that. So even when I have virginal heroines, they often have a collection of erotic novels, so they kind of know what's going on. And so, like, for me, the sexuality is part of the empowerment. And so I kind of like writing them. I think for me, the challenge is coming up with sort of novel ways of setting them, so that and also make sure that they service the characters as well as the plot of the novel. So for me, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of writing in general, and then writing sex scenes during this time period.
I feel like this time period is hard for creativity, and for optimism in general. Like, it's just so uncertain. It's a hard feeling, I feel like, to overcome, to be super creative and happy in a time where everything feels uncertain. So I can't imagine having to come up with that. But I can also hopefully imagine that, when you are in the groove, it's fun and rewarding because it is happy and optimistic in a time of uncertainty. So Jessica, when you said there was another question though, right?
Yeah, and I think that is going to go really well with our last questions. So I'm going to wait so we can get to the other ones.
All right. Just point at us when you want to jump back in there. So I wanted to get a little bit deeper into kind of what we were talking about. You mentioned Georgette Hare, Eva, and I'm curious why Regency Romance readers kind of expect us to follow certain rules within the Regency. Why do you think that is? I mean, I have a speculation, but rather than say that, although I already said Georgette Hare, but I feel like you kind of mentioned how, Regency was, there was no diversity, and we didn't think that there was anything other than, rich white folks living in England at the time. And now we're starting to find, in the genre that no, there's more than that. And that's fabulous. But I think that there's still a set maybe that feels like Regency has a rules and it has a box. And I'm curious, do you guys think that there's a reason that they think that? I don't know. Who wants to start? Erica?
Okay. I think that it is twofold. I think the first one you've already alluded to, while there are certainly people who are historical experts, I would say probably the average reader bases their knowledge on things they have read in other books or things they have seen in movies. And I have fielded several emails from people who have told me that something I did or said or had happened in one of my books was wrong because they read a novel by someone else or saw a movie that did it differently. Therefore, I have made this horrible mistake. And so there's just a little bit of, conflating other fiction, which if you're doing it right, of course, it feels real. but you're still world building and taking artistic liberty and all these other things. And you can't ever assume that what you read in one place, like obviously the Harris books, that it's the gospel truth. And then I think the other flip side of that is that we, as humans, it's hard to separate your experience from your expectations. And so if you are a certain type of individual who lives in a certain type of world, whatever that is, you kind of believe that everyone else does the same thing. Like everyone thinks that they're the average person. Other people think or do this because I do it. And so because historical romance has been a certain way for so long, I think it has attracted a certain kind of person who then it would be difficult to have your worldview changed both in the book realm and in your real life challenged kind of in the same way at the same time.
Absolutely. Eva?
Yeah, Erica, that was a really good point, because I think in terms of like framing something as the mean or the median based on your experience, and so, and also this sort of notion that like, well, I read about it in Judith McNaught. That's how it is. It's like, obviously there's so many layers of interpretation, and utilizing interpretation as foundational truth is obviously very problematic. That's how we wind up with a lot of the biases and sort of institutional aspects that are so difficult and can sort of reap these sort of societal ills. I know that, like, for example, I use profanity in my work. And also certain like characters having a certain amount of sexual experience, especially the female characters, be like, oh, it didn't happen. I'm like, well, A, you weren't there. And have you read Boswell? I mean, wow, this guy, so it's like profanity existed, kink existed, all of this existed. And it's a matter of like, are you filtering it through your own biases, through what you want to see? So I'm really excited. Also because the gatekeeping has been sort of falling away, to get to see that, these voices have been there all of this time, and the mean white heterosexual woman reader who was like the reader of romance, that's like, that's who we picture, like, but it's not really true. And also, who's the we that we're talking about? I'm framing it again from my experience as a white heterosexual woman. So like, it's like you just keep pulling it apart, and it's a very active and challenging but necessary process, I think, that people have to go through.
Yeah, super, super interesting to hear your guys talk, and I completely agree. I feel like I was kind of, as you said, alluding to my own opinions a little bit coming in there, so apologies. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of already touched on it a little bit of like seeing more diversity. And I think some of those rules that we've thought, like we said, things are kind of coming away. And so maybe there's going to be a little bit more even than we're seeing now, diversity in historical romance. And as a reader, that excites me a lot, because I've been reading more of these books that are like that, or are doing something a little bit different than many of the books that I've read and love. And that's exciting. I feel like anytime that something you love does something you don't expect, that's just like a really exciting time for that, and only makes you fall in love with it more. So I wanted to dig in a little bit on historical accuracy. It kind of comes with the rules. Some readers, again, are very like, well, this didn't happen in that time period, or this word, like you said, wasn't used then, even though maybe it was. So what do you guys think about historical accuracy when you write? Like, what does historical accuracy mean to you for writing these books? Eva?
Historical accuracy is such a deeply loaded term, because it's utilized a lot to silence and exclude. Mm-hmm. And so when that word is implemented by specific individuals, what it seems like they're saying to me is, I don't want to hear about it. Like, this is not the way that I want to imagine this time period to be. This, like, so I could, I'm going to rein it in, but you know what I mean? So like, yes. I feel like when people say that's not historically accurate, I'm like, are you literally a scholar of this time period? Have you read every single published and unpublished source about this topic? I mean, it's impossible for you to know all of this. And like, again, it's that issue of gatekeeping. It's like, well, we know that there were women of color writing during the Regency. Why aren't you, but there were things in place to make sure that we didn't get to hear from these voices. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, historical accuracy is like, do your research and then also understand who's telling you what and investigate that and drill down into it.
How about for you, Eva? Or not you, Eva, Erica. I'm staring at Erica.
You want more? I keep talking. Hi.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in many cases, when we hear back from readers that something wasn't historically accurate, in many cases, it absolutely was. It maybe wasn't what they expected to read or the trope that they were looking for. Like Eva, I've gotten pushback before on sex-positive female characters. I get a lot of not historically accurate mail about that. And the idea that all women were virgins until they were married is ridiculous. That's not a thing that's ever happened in any time period. And so I do think that there's a lot of conflating what you want, what you've seen, what you were looking for with facts, and it's not the same.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on historical accuracy because, like I said, as a reader who's read hundreds of Regency and Victorian romance novels, I have never once picked up a history book, and I've not even watched that many period pieces. So all of my knowledge of the Regency comes from reading historical romance novels, but I still am not a scholar on, the English aristocracy. I don't know. If you tell me that this guy can inherit, like, I'm the kind of person that's like, sure, he inherited whatever, but I do think it is really interesting because a lot of people do respond so strongly to that. And I think there was just a quote in an opinion piece that I really liked that I kind of wanted to share. And this opinion piece is on Frolic, the website Frolic Media. So if y'all want to check it out, you can check it out there. And it's called "Historical Accuracy is Absolute Bunk," I believe. And it's by a blogger named Esme Brett. And she just had this little segment that I really particularly like. She said, "Historical accuracy in romance is just a curated selection. It's someone sitting at a desk and playing Marie Kondo with nuggets of information. I imagine a novelist pouring through reference images of gorgeous frocks and going, yes, this gives me joy. I'll mention the type of lace trim my heroine would have had on her dress in 1845. Should I mention that all of her teeth would have been rotting out of her head? No joy. Discard." So I feel like, there's so many people who do react strongly to this wasn't there yet, but there's a lot of things we don't put in historical romance because it's not particularly romantic. But I just particularly liked her Marie Kondo. No joy.
Yeah.
Get rid of the rotting teeth. So kind of coming back to that, you guys both talked about the books you started reading were kind of the same, the authors you both mentioned. And how do you think then, and we've talked a little bit about this, but how do you think that today's books differ from the books that you started reading romance with? Eva, do you want to start?
Well, one thing I have noticed is that there is a narrowing of settings and time periods, because I remember when I was reading, there was a lot more variety, I think, and there's been a certain amount of contraction in terms of a preference for 19th century England and Scotland, as opposed to there used to be a lot more medievals, there used to be a lot more American historicals and things like that. So I think that's been one of the major alterations. I know that the women's ownership of their sexuality, like you're saying, Erica, that's been something that's been evolving over the course of the historical romance novel. So I know that that's been something that's changing. I would really like to see, just personally, I would love to see own voices within the historical realm, because I think sometimes when we talk about diversity, it's like diversity is written by a white heterosexual woman. And so I want to see diversity is written by the stories of the people who this was their history. So I'd love to go in, I just keep gesturing. I would love to go in that direction. And I'd love to see more of that. And I definitely did not see that. Or if I did, I think there was a pressure to conform to a certain type, like with a name, like a pseudonym, or maybe you wouldn't include your author photograph because you didn't want to put anybody off by the fact that you were X, Y, or Z or something like that. So I'd like to see, I just really want to keep moving forward in that direction. I want to open the door and let more people in rather than claiming narratives for myself.
And how about you, Erica?
I would say for me, the biggest difference between then and now is back then, the books I was picking up were at flea markets and used bookstores and garage sales. And so they were the biggest names that were curated by, as Eva says, the white cisgender heterosexual publishing industry at the time. And we can argue about what it looks like now. And so there was just basically like one flavor coming in at me. And then so the big change is the internet. So whether or not traditional publishing has narrowed in scope, the internet has allowed self-publishing and small publishers to kind of flourish in the niches that otherwise wouldn't have been served at all. So the Erica of today, if I were 14 years old today, I would be able to find things that are far more targeted towards my color, my orientation, my everything that wouldn't have existed for me back then. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I do think that slowly, but hopefully surely, the boat is shifting with the big houses as well. And that we're starting to see more of that so that someday soon, I hope, when we can go into supermarkets, we'll be able to see a wider variety there at the cashier lane instead of kind of the very narrow options that there were before.
I'm very hopeful, as I've said before, that we get more of that. I mean, I think it's interesting. We've talked about non-heterosexual couples and we've talked about people of color, but historical romance also features, I think, almost exclusively Christianity. So there's like, as a Jewish person myself, who's pretty non-practicing, I feel like I know more about Christianity and its practices than I know about Judaism and its practices. And I really I'm so fascinated to read a book about Jewish people in that time because that's my heritage. And so I can imagine that being super powerful to anybody in any genre that you love, to be able to read about people like you. It's just different. And also, of course, if it's written by perspective of someone who has that perspective, there's often another layer to that, which is really just really nice to have. So I'm very hopeful too. And as to, I'm only one of today's readers, but I can concur with everything that I heard here. So, what is important then to you guys as writers to have in the books that you're writing now, for the readers that are reading now? Erica, you want to start us off?
I guess at a fundamental level, I would say humor and a connection based on something stronger than affluence and sexual compatibility. So I want to write about people who don't just love each other, they like each other. They're going to laugh together for the rest of their lives. I think it's important. I feel like once upon a time, there were a lot of books out there or movies where there's a man and a woman and they fall in love because they're in the same book and not because they're truly a good match. And so that's kind of important for me. And then also doing my part, whatever I can do to make it a little bit more diverse, a little different, like Eva said, subverting tropes or just expanding the world whenever, the story world, I mean, not the real world, whenever I can.
It's fabulous. And how about you, Eva?
Yeah, like Erica was saying, I've always like why are these two people together? Because we see in non-traditional and like in other genres that aren't romance, well, there's two characters and one of them happens to be a woman, so I guess she's going to wind up with somebody at some point because that's her purpose or something like that. Always for me, I always have to come back to the why of the couple. Like, why are they right for each other? Or if you're not writing a couple, you can do so. Like, why are these people right for each other, whoever they are? So that's always been important to me. I've been trying to do as little harm as I possibly can by not perpetuating stereotypes or biases in my work. I know that I'm probably doing some of it, and so I just have to keep consistently working and thinking and unpacking what it is that I'm doing and putting forth on the page. For me, intersectional feminism is pretty significant, and I had to really start to think about the intersectional component of feminism and like how that manifests in my work. So I wanted to put that out there. I want people to have a good time, to enjoy themselves. I've had people say that they've read my book while they're going through difficult periods in their life, and it was helpful, even if only for a few hours. And for me, that's really significant and important that I can provide that. I know that romance often gets knocked because we're just like, it's obviously it's so frequently denigrated, but because it doesn't have an unhappily, it's like there's a happily ever after this. There's a positive resolution at the end of this. That means it's not serious for some reason, or it's not worthwhile or significant. And I feel that like there is a deep, meaningful power to providing readers with hope and escape and joy. I'm not like trying to be like, yeah, I do that for these people. That's what I'm trying to do. And if I can do that, then I feel like I've succeeded at my work.
Well, as I've said many times as a reader of historical romance, I think that, you authors are doing that, because I definitely derive a lot of joy from these novels. And also, especially, I feel like with, newer things, and not just newer, but some of the, older things have been really helpful in my own feminist journey. So, I think it's there. Romance is predominantly written by women for women, and there's just something that's a little bit special about that, which I won't get into completely because we have some other Facebook questions, I believe. Jessica, did you have one that you wanted to highlight, or?
Let's see. So this is our other question. So we have some contemporary readers that are watching this that don't usually read historical, and they're just wondering basically about tropes. Do you have any second chance romances? And as a reader, do you have any second chance romances that you enjoy?
There's a book by Joanna Bourne called The Black Hawk, where I don't know if it's necessarily a second chance romance, but it's a great story where these two characters meet as children, like adolescents, and then they keep kind of butting up against each other over the course of the French Revolution and then into the Regency period, because it's about espionage in that era. And I love that book. It's just a beautifully written book, but I really like the dynamics between the characters. And so it's not about like they meet and suddenly they're in a relationship. It's like it evolves and grows into, in a sense, this relationship between two very damaged people. So it is kind of their second chance as adults to find love and healing and happiness together.
I love that book. I love that series. So
she's so good. I'm just mad when I read books that are just really good. I'm just like, I'm so angry that I didn't write that.
And how about you, Erica? Any books of yours or any suggestions?
Yeah, I have some second chances books. If you're an e-reader, Once Upon a Duke is free at the moment, and it's a Second Chances. It's first in the 12 Dukes of Christmas series. It's hard for me to think of recommendations off the top of my head. I'm really bad at this. I feel like Sherry Thomas has done some good Second Chances in Regency. So, and you probably can't go wrong with her just in general. I'll try to think of more examples.
I do have a Second Chance romance now that I think about it. In From Duke Till Dawn, the hero and the heroine have kind of a prior relationship, and then they meet again a few years later, and it's not really a spoiler because it's in the blurb, but she's a con artist and she conned him, and he learns about that. So, and then they have to kind of come back together again.
I'm going to throw another one out there too, which is an Eloisa James book called This Duchess of Mine. And it's a Duke and a Duchess who are married and then estranged and then not estranged. So yeah, there are second chances in Regency for sure. Mm-hmm. Jessica, were there any other questions before we get towards our wrap up?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, then, as we're wrapping up here, I think we wanted to know, do you guys have a favorite library memory? Anybody?
When I was in elementary school, periodically they would march us to our little library in the school. And that was always like one of the highlights. I don't have a specific memory like, oh, and at this point this happened, but I just loved going. And I kept checking out the same books, like a Greek mythology book and stuff like that. I kept doing that over and over again. But like, it was always such I always loved libraries. And I even remember when I was like in high school, my dad had moved to New York. And so I was trying to write historical romance in high school. And I remember doing and he lived in the Bronx. So I would take like a special van to get into the city so I could go to the New York Public Library, the Lions, and conduct research. And this is like my summer vacation, and I'm like, woo, library, so it's it was always a place that I really wanted to go.
Erica, how about you?
Well, I feel like I was raised in the library. My grandmother was a librarian at a university, and so I loved to go hang out in the stacks. And my mother was a teacher, so she would also take me to the big library downtown every Saturday, and I would hang out there all day. She would drop me off, so I was a free babysitter. And I would read books, and then when she would come pick me up, I would check out the maximum number, which was 10. So I would carry my stack of books out, and then I would read them and then come back the next week for more. So I have always loved libraries. And in fact, now that I live here in Costa Rica, it's kind of my dream that someday I'll be able to open a library here to have the kids around here get the kind of experience that I had with that, because it was just so special to be able to go do.
Oh, that warms my heart.
Definitely. And Jessica and I shared our memories the last time. So if we have repeat watchers, we won't subject everyone to our favorite library memories again. But so as we're closing up here, we want to know, and our watchers want to know, what is next for you? So Erica, what's next for you?
Well, so I mentioned earlier the Wild Winchester series. So the Duke Heist will be the first book in that series. That'll come out in February. So that's very exciting, brand new series. And then I'm also this year finishing up the 12 Dukes of Christmas. So I've got those books coming out September through December. And I'm looking forward to those as well.
Awesome. And Eva?
So as you guys mentioned in the intro, the next book, which is this one, it's just so coincidental, it just happened to be right here, is Would I Lie to the Duke? And this will be coming out July 28th. And this is another part of the Union of the Rakes series. So this book takes its inspiration from the movie Working Girl with Melanie Griffith and Harrison Ford and Sigourney Weaver. So it's secret identity, kind of business world. And there's some other little Easter eggs and things like that. This is the second book in the series, and I just turned into my editor a couple weeks ago the third book in the series. and which is the Scottish Heroes book. And the clue as to what this inspiration is taken from is in his name, which is McCameron, and he's with Lady Ferris on a road trip. So it's based a little bit on the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, that's so fun. I wish I'd realized that as I was reading. As I said, I got to read an advanced copy of What I Lied to the Duke. And if I should have put those two together, I did catch one of the other Easter eggs that's maybe not quite as subtle. And it made me smile a lot, which I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone. So you should all grab those books when they come out. So please do. And then where can readers find you and where can they get your books? Eva.
So I spend an inordinate, probably problematic amount of time on Twitter. So you can find me at Zoe_Archer, because that was my original pen name, was Zoe Archer. I also am on Instagram at ZoeArcher73. You can also find me at Eva Leigh Author online. I think those are probably the best places that you can find me. And I love hearing from readers, because it makes me feel like I'm not doing this in a little cave and nobody cares. So please. I'm good. I'm fine. I'm not like cabin fever at all. I'm totally good.
Erica?
I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Erica Ridley, which is my name. And so you can find me any of those places.
Awesome. That's so great. So thank you guys. Jessica, I think you have a few closing words for us.
Yes, I do. I just want to thank you for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful authors, Erica and Ava, and our moderator, Zoe, for spending time with us today, talking about historical romance novels and just sharing all of our thoughts. Now, before I close, Zoe wants to tell you all about her wonderful podcast, Tea and Strumpets, where you can listen to her and Kelsey discuss all the steamy and sometimes tepid details of the Regency Romance genre.
Yes. So if you're interested, I have to plug myself. Sorry. If you're interested in, hearing more about historical romance, getting more historical romance, Regency Romance recommendations, that's what we do. And we also talk to amazing authors. So amazing authors, if y'all would ever be interested in joining us, we'd love to have you on. But we're everywhere you get podcasts. We're called Tea and Strumpets, and our website is romancepod.com. So you can check us out in any of those places. And we're on all the socials. You can find us.
Thank you. And just a quick reminder that the Escondido Public Library's Spring Virtual Activity Challenge is going on now until May 31st. You can do activities and win virtual prizes. All you have to do is go to our website, sign up, and this virtual program counts as a point, so you can already get a point right away. We hope to see you next week for our chat on Saturday, May 9th with romance authors Allison Ashley and Yata S. Santos.
Ooh, and thank you guys again so much for joining us. This was so much fun. It was so great to talk to you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a real pleasure, and thank you for listening to me rant.
Anytime.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.
Hi, I'm Elle Penelope, and I'm an author of epic fantasy and paranormal romance, and also the host of My Imaginary Friends, which is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. On my show, you'll get a weekly look behind the scenes of an author navigating the publishing world, as well as thoughts and tips on creativity, inspiration, writing routines, and more. So if you're an established or an aspiring writer, or a reader who always wanted a peek into an author's life, You can find me at myimaginaryfriendsshow.com or wherever you get your podcasts.